Also, hello to Twitch and YouTube. Please excuse the mess on this side. Um, it is, it's the coldest week of the year so far. And it's been snowing in parts of Johannesburg. It snowed earlier today, late last night, earlier today. Yeah, it's been snowing. And I love the snow, but it's just way too cold. I hope all of you are well. Thank you so much, Raven, for supporting on the Twitch side, and welcome everybody on the Tiki Talkie. And of course, I am, as always, on Discord, where all of these readings started. And today is my 6-year anniversary of starting these readings. I can't believe it is 6 years. It used to be once a week on Thursdays, but I don't know when I started then. Well, it became Thursdays, but it is 6 years since I started these readings. So, yeah, we've come a long way. And remember, I do these readings for free, so please, if you can tackle this goal, it would be very, very welcome. I need to invest in a couple of things before starting fixing up the next part of the house. So, yeah, being jobless sucks. Thank you, Nemo. But yeah, we are back with The Architecture of Modern Empire, an interview between Arundhati Roy and David Barsamian. And last week we were talking about the concept of the terrorist. And she was explaining that the concept of the terrorist is invented to distract away from the terrorism of the state. And now we're back to talking about India in particular, especially how they brand Muslims as terrorists, as the West does. Islam and terrorism have become so intertwined with each other in the minds of the West and in places like India that are still very much colonized in mind and in economy, that senior officers in the Indian army have been charged with terrorism, but they're not pictured in the papers as the faces of terrorism. So yeah, the first time I celebrated Christmas in the North, it was just really weird because we celebrate Christmas in summer. And Christmas Day is generally cocktails and a braai, which is essentially South African version of a barbecue, just better. So yeah, we get back into it. Lieutenant Colonel Shrikant Prasad Purohit was implicated in the Malajian blast. Malajian and the Samjhauta Express blasts. I think it's important to say that the attack on Mumbai was the most recent in a series of attacks there and in Delhi, Jaipur, Bangalore, and Ahmedabad. And oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Kiara. Kiara. As always, my dear heart. All the people that the police have held as suspect in these attacks are Indian nationals, Hindu and Muslim. Initially, they were all Muslim. There were several big loopholes in the investigations, which some of us pointed out. L.K. Advani, who sees himself as the next candidate for Prime Minister, went around campaigning against us by name, saying that we are anti-nationals, and it was suicidal to question the police and so on. And then the Maharashtra anti-terrorism squad arrested arrested this Hindu sadhvi, godwoman, Pragya Singh Thakur, and a few self-styled Hindu priests, and Purohit, a senior serving officer in the Indian army. And then Advani himself began to campaign against the Maharashtra anti-terrorism squad, saying that they were acting in a politically motivated and unprofessional manner. Of course they were. This is like ice. The fact is, we in India today have a murky history of these attacks. Many people, including myself, have exposed how these police fabricate evidence, how the media fabricates evidence, how the courts work, and in ways that make any kind of due process ridiculous and redundant. It's the same story over and over again. L.K. Advani, and the BJP leader, has mentioned you in public talks. This is him saying to her. Turning to the media, the television anchor Arnab Goswami, one of the leading voices on Times Now, also had something to say about you during his coverage of the Mumbai attacks. Yeah, about me and Prashant Bhushan, who is the leading lawyer. I hope Arundhati Roy and Prashant Bhushan are listening. We haven't invited them to our show because they are disgusting. That's what they said. To believe that citizens should sit quietly while all of this is happening, there's no need for a debate, and there's no need for questions that feed into this terrifying atmosphere of nationalism and fascism. And I don't use the word fascism lightly. I started to use the term after what happened in Gujarat, when 2,000 people were slaughtered in broad daylight in the streets of Gujarat, and the police watched, and in fact participated. That those who participated were then promoted. That those who killed then appeared on television to boast about how they killed and how they were supported. And then those who killed and supervised the killing were voted into power, twice. The entire democratic machinery colluded with the courts of India. And the people. Let's not leave out the people. The people who knew that these things happened voted for the killers, saying that's what Muslims deserve. And it's interesting that we are reading Orientalism while reading this, because you can pinpoint where Islamophobia starts. You can pinpoint where the hatred, and I wouldn't even call it Islamophobia, I would say the hatred for Muslim people starts in the minds of people in the West. It starts with Orientalism. It starts with this Orientalist idea that Islam is going to overthrow Christianity and good Christian nations. And then it moves on from there as personifying the terrorist as Islamic. Oh. I need a new chair. This chair is just... You make some connections between 26th 11th and the US foreign policy in South Asia. You refer it to the detritus of the two African wars. She says, in a way, at least in the corporate media, there's a sort of coy silence about the role of the US in what has happened in the subcontinent. The US and India are so closely allied that sometimes when one takes action regarding another, you can't tell who it is just by naming it. Like, this government supplied arms to this terrorist group. You can ask which one, because it could be both. And India is becoming huge in the weapons industry and in surveillance. Like, guess who else? Maybe the quote-unquote only democracy in the Middle East? Pakistan was the crucible in which America conducted an experiment in its jihad against the Soviet Union. I love how she puts that. Its own jihad. The US partakes in jihad far more than Muslim countries. Pakistan was the recruiting agency and the recruiting ground for Mujahideen fighters from Chechnya, Saudi Arabia, and elsewhere to come and fight the Soviets in Afghanistan. People were simply recruited, given Stinger missiles and AK-47s, and told to go and fight. People were indoctrinated, brainwashed into fighting that desperate war in which more than 1 million people were killed. Once you release those Frankenstein monsters into the world, you can't whistle and hope they will come back like trained mastiffs. When John McCain, Condoleezza Rice, and Gordon Brown say Pakistan is the heart of evil and the founder of terrorism, it's like scientists blaming their crucible for an experiment gone wrong. There are no easy answers to the problem of terrorism, certainly no easy answers to 9/11. The fact that the US bombed Afghanistan into the Stone Age didn't help them. And now to assume that you can bomb Pakistan to sort out the problem is absurd beyond belief. We are living in a dangerous era, and more than anything, you need a brain to sort it out. That seems to be a scarce commodity. You also commented about the United States. A superpower never has allies, it only has agents. Oh! Wow. The Indian government and elites are lining up with the Americans, but ultimately you suggest that it will backfire. Yes, because it's using a country from the developing world, from the underdeveloped and now developing world, as a token. Look, these brown people stand with us. But you know, tokens get spent. It will backfire. Does anybody care to study the history of former allies of the US and what happens to them when they're kicked over like an empty pail? The world is full of these examples, whether it's Iraq, Pakistan, or Chile. The list goes on and on and on. I don't think anybody should have illusions about how much America loves India. It's interesting how Israel is now part of the equation. Tel Aviv, New Delhi, and Washington. Anand Patwardhan recalls a time when Indian passports were stamped with invalid for 2 countries in the world. One was apartheid South Africa and the other Israel. The situation today is very different. I think about the fact every morning we wake up and have this national pride rammed down our throats when actually there's no pride. There was a time when India stood for something, part of a non-aligned movement where there was a sort of moral dignity. So the more we are told that we should feel national pride, in fact, the more you actually ought to be ashamed, because you know that this country stands for nothing except it's the self-interest of the elites. On the other hand, people throughout India are involved in environmental movements, displaced people's protests, and agitation. That side of India is alive and thriving and full of fire and dignity. I feel a great deal of pride in that, and I'm in awe of the fact that this is a country where people are not taking things lying down. People are fighting with so much imagination. Yet the world of official power and diplomats and armies and weapons and governments, we have humiliated ourselves while trying to force people to feel national pride. There cannot be national pride when there's a sense of where there is abuse of power. And the light is out. I knew it did not charge enough. But still, I took it off the charger. Hi, Moss. It's good to see you. The year 2009 marks the 25th anniversary of two crucial events. One is the Bhopal Union Carbide gas leak. I was just in Bhopal. 2,000 people have died. Many thousands continue to suffer. I visited a clinic and talked to some supervisors. Children are being born with defects because the aquifer was contaminated by chemical leaks. Nothing has happened to Union Carbide, which is now owned by Dow Chemical, a huge U.S. chemical corporation, infamous for making Agent Orange during Vietnam. The second is the massacre of thousands of Sikhs in the wake of the assassination of Indira Gandhi. To date, no one has been brought to book in either of these cases. The Indian government didn't ask for the extradition of Warren Anderson, the head of Union Carbide, who was protected by the U.S. government. And the government in power in India today still shelters the people who killed Sikhs and burned them alive on the streets of this city, and has denied justice to those people all those years. Sorry, I don't take requests from people I don't know. This kind of poison never goes away. The Congress Party did nothing to hold these people who participated in those killings accountable. They kept quiet over the killing of Muslims in Gujarat. The killing of Sikhs didn't spark wider outrage because Sikhs are a small localized community. But everything in India is like this. Everything is swept under the rug. You never get to the bottom of anything. The Godhra train was burned. Who burnt that train? Pilgrims died. Who did it? We still don't know. Who attacked Parliament on December 13, 2001? We still don't know. Who were the killers in Gujarat, Bombay? It wasn't the Sri Krishna Commission report implemented when the Muslims were killed in Gujarat. You never get to the bottom of it. These things don't go away. They grow and become something poisoned in the bloodstream, informing the politics of what's going on. And eventually you can't push it away because there comes a time when people simply won't take it anymore. Whatever spin you put on it, people will know what's going on eventually. And we are finding out now. Our governments are fucking around and are finding out the strength of their people. And if you think about it, how many years were you unaware of the truth in Palestine? In fact, I'm going to ask the difficult question. How many of you believed that Israel was the only democracy in the Middle East? How many of you believed Israel's narrative? Hi. Thank you so much. Dreamy, it's so good to see you. I've missed you. It's so good to see you. Now that we have easier access to information, thank you. Now that we have easier access to information, how much more did you find out? How much more did you start to understand when the people most affected started telling their stories? Yeah, no, it is a sudden, sorry, that was a very dirty camera. Yeah, absolutely, JJ. The more I learn, the angrier I get. It's a case of how can we look at all this information and take it lying down? It is exasperating. Because all of these incidences that she talks about are just within India alone. How many terrorist actions that have our governments had a hand in, where we don't know the answers. We don't know who is responsible. We know who's responsible for killing Stephen Bantu Biko. Did they see the inside of a jail cell? Did they see any sort of... Did Chris Hani's family, like, knowing that, there was so much more behind his killing. Janus Wallace is behind bars, but is that enough? Yep. Understandable. I mean, ultimately, what happened with you and the military, but the wealthy and the powerful never see consequence. And as long as we have these oligarchies in power, they never will. My tea is getting cold. Regime change in the United States will not happen without a violent revolution. A very, very violent revolution. And you cannot expect a revolution to happen. I don't look forward to that. The bloodier the revolution, the more the most marginalized are going to suffer. Disabled people will be killed first. Jess? Yeah. Yeah? Let me ask you about the new President of the United States, Barack Obama, and the promise of hope. People say he will change America's image in the world, which has been damaged under the Bush regime. What is your response? Thank you. Love. My tea's cold. Can you heat it up for me, please? Yeah, I get you, Jess. Thank you. No. Put it back. Thank you. Bush is still a monster. I'm going to say it outright. Bush is still a monster. Just because there's another monster out there doesn't take any monstrosity away from George W. Bush. Nope. Bush had more than 1 million people killed. Based on a lie. To me, he's still the biggest monster. Even compared to Trump. Because he still holds the same ideologies as Trump. And then he got more than 1 million people killed. Looking for weapons of mass distraction. It's difficult to say. I watched the night he won and wasn't so concerned about who he was, as much as to see the happiness on people's faces and know that whatever will be given to them, they wanted change and they wanted something else, and it means a lot. Thank you. Because the last time they wanted the same guy back, It was devastating for the rest of the world when Bush was re-elected. We don't say that necessarily in the States, selected the first time, elected the second. That election hardened a lot of people's hearts, including mine. She's talking about Bush. Because I'd been one of those people who said there is a difference between the government and the people of the United States during the occupation of Afghanistan and Iraq. Now with Obama winning, the fact that he has been utterly quiet on the bombing of Gaza. He has recruited so many of the old guard. I haven't seen anything on the ground that makes me feel like it's going to be all that different. Even if, in fact, the people wanted a change, it makes me feel better about the people. And he was accused of being a terrorist. And guess what? Obama was. Absolutely. Supported Israel. Did nothing about Guantanamo Bay. Maintained sanctions on Cuba. Did not ratify Roe v. Wade. The Democrats, unfortunately, are impotent. They spend so much of their time fixing the previous 8 years that they don't get to what they need to do in their own terms. And that is by design. They really do. And incoming are some of the democratic socialists who are looking at all of this fucked up shit and saying, hang on, let's do something differently. Let's maybe work for the people. Maybe. Maybe it might work. I still have some issues with Mamdani. He's doing some good. They're doing a very, very bad job of it, Jess. Because the people are being bled dry. Mm-hmm. 100%. It's not enough. Okay, so we get to chapter 9, Revolts and Rebellions. We get closer now. This is the year that I stepped into the biggest newsroom I've ever worked in. 2011. I started working as a journalist in quite a large newsroom in 2009 when I stepped into the newsroom of The Times to work full-time. It was a mindfuck. And I started to see why I became a journalist in the first place. So, Revolts and Rebellions. This interview was conducted in New Delhi, India, on February 21st, 2011. The summer of 2010 was one of the bloodiest yet in Indian-administered Kashmir. It was the summer of stones and the stone throwers. What are those stones saying, and who are the stone throwers? As usual, powerful states and powerful people tend to believe in their own publicity, and they believed that they somehow had managed to break the spine of the freedom movement in Kashmir. Then suddenly, for 3 summers in a row, there has been this kind of street uprising, similar to Tahrir Square in Egypt. We see a sentiment for freedom that keeps expressing itself in different ways. During that past 20 years, the establishment has geared itself to deal with militancy and some sort of armed struggle, but now finds itself facing young people armed only with stones. Sounds familiar. And with all this weaponry that the Indian government has poured into Kashmir, they don't know what to do about stones. Couple this with the fact that one of the other great weapons in the Indian occupation has been the manipulation of the Indian media. This big, noisy dam of misinformation has been breached through social media. Stories are coming out of Kashmir that haven't before. We see parallels all over the place when it comes to India, when it comes to Kashmir, when it comes to Palestine, when it comes to the most marginalized communities in the US. You cannot unsee what we have been seeing. And I'm not just talking about the horrific visuals, because every single fucking day I see children in ribbons hanging from barbed wire in Gaza. Before I close my eyes, in my sleep, I see parents picking up their children in pieces. And one of the images that sticks in my head, constantly stays in my head, is of that child who was run over by a fucking American Sherman in the streets of the West Bank because he threw a stone. And I think about the symbolism behind all of it, behind the fact that kids in Kashmir are throwing stones at tankers, emboldened by the bravery of the kids in Palestine. We cannot unsee what we have seen. And we need to push against TikTok being owned by Oracle. Suppressing the narratives. Kashmir is crisscrossed with this grid of army camps, interrogation centers, prisons, guard posts, bunkers, and watchtowers. It has earned the dubious distinction of being the most militarized zone in the world. What is living under occupation like for Kashmiris? Yeah, and you know what? A lot of people say that Gaza was the most militarized place in the world. They would even say that about the West Bank. No, it was Kashmir until the West Bank started growing as an occupied outpost of Israel. Mm-hmm. Because it stopped being fashionable. I think a good thing is that Kashmiris have begun to write and speak about themselves, and that's important. When people's narratives are squashed, you have the wide berth of misinformation and disinformation that we have. Israeli Hasbara is no longer working because people are telling their own stories. I don't think it needs someone like me to tell the story. You and I don't know the story from personal experience. We are not the people who would be stopped and humiliated at checkposts, slapped or beaten up and casually humiliated. The Indian government has waged wars on the edges of the country, Kashmir, Manipur, Nagaland, and Mizoram in Assam, ever since India was independent. Kashmir is not the only place where there are checkposts and bunkers and killings and humiliation, but war has now spread to the heart of the country. The Indian state does not want to consider or address the conversations that are coming out of Kashmir or read the messages on these stones. But the rest of India is becoming Kashmir in some way. The militarization, repression, all of this spreading around the whole country. So why isn't Kashmir getting more international attention? It's a good question. When the uprisings happened in Egypt, people moved into Tahrir Square. Being someone who has followed the ways in which international media reports various events, I wondered, why does it choose some uprisings and not others? Because the bravery of people, whether it's Egypt, in Kashmir or Congo, or whatever's going on, one is not questioning that. But why will international media, Western media in particular, shine a light on one and switch the lights off on another? That is the question. And that is one of the questions that my thesis asks. Why is it switching the lights off on other stories? As we saw in Egypt, you had breathless reporting about this uprising for democracy. Why will they talk about Egypt and not about Kashmir? It's just your politics, isn't it? Egypt is so important for the Americans and the Western establishment to control, because without Egypt, the siege on Gaza doesn't exist. And you know what, Hosni Mubarak was dying. There had to be a replacement. Excuse me. There was going to be a real problem during the handover of power. I don't think it will necessarily succeed, but I think the attempt was to use and direct people's energy in the sort of controlled fission experiment. But so far as Kashmir goes right now, the Afghanistan-Pakistan-Indian equation vaults over Kashmir. The situation in Kashmir is not something that the world of corporations, markets, or even strategic geopolitics sees as threatening to the status quo. Deals are being made. The West needs Pakistan badly. It cannot do anything with Afghanistan unless Pakistan is on board. And yes, it needs India badly for two reasons. One, it's a huge market, and the other, it's a willing fallback for the US presence in South Asia, given the rise of China. India is seen as a stable, a willing ally right now. So to annoy India by bringing up Kashmir is not something that strategically suits Western powers. A week before candidate Obama was elected in 2008, he announced Kashmir would be among his critical tasks. How was that comment received in Delhi? And what has Obama done since to follow up? He was in India in November 2010, you know. That comment was treated with absolute and righteous outrage by the Indian establishment, and I think it was made very clear to him or anyone who says anything about Kashmir internationally that the Indian establishment will use anything and everything in its power to make sure people back down. And Obama backed down. He came here at a time when the streets of Kashmir were full of people calling for Azadi, when already many people had been killed, and still he said nothing. I wonder why. Didn't benefit his interests, did it? I'd like to ask you about other post-colonial states. For example, Fanon, who was active in the resistance in Algeria to oust the French, argued that we needed fundamental changes in the structures of power, not just to exchange white politicians for brown, or policemen for brown or black ones. And he wrote about the ways Algeria, after independence, evolved into a tyrannical state, not the state that the revolution dreamed of. One of the characteristics of post-colonial states is the manipulation of oppressed minorities. Kashmiris are sent to police and patrol Chhattisgarh, and people from the northeast are sent to Kashmir to do the exact same thing. And I think this question is worded in a beautiful way. Because sometimes it's not a an overturning of power, it's an exchange of power. Just like Indians were sent to Iraq and all over the place to fight Britain's wars, India acts like a colonial state. You see the unknown Indian soldier buried all over the world fighting for empire, and even within India. You'll look at, historically, 1857. Some call it a mutiny, some call it the first freedom struggle. What exactly happened? How many British soldiers were here in India? Not many. But, for instance, in 1857, the Sikhs fought on the side of the British in the ransacking of Delhi. But today India does that. It sends Nagas to Chhattisgarh, Chhattisgarhs to Kashmir, Kashmiris to Odisha. Given the level of opposition to its rule in Kashmir, what keeps India there? It's a whole lot of things. One is that both India and Pakistan have vested interest now in keeping Kashmir on the boil. To have 700,000 soldiers there, you can imagine the sums of money poured into occupation and what's happening with that money. Property, concertina wire, petrol, vehicles, power. The power to control a population like that. The business deals with the collaborators and local elites. It's like running a little country. Why would anybody want to give that up? That's one thing. The other thing, oddly enough, is that just because it's just become such a question of national ego that to rethink this position when you're so far down the tunnel would require a great amount of vision. Then you have a situation where political parties in India are vying with each other. If the Congress party, which is in power now, would do anything that remotely resembled something progressive in Kashmir, the BJP would immediately try to capitalize on it. So this democracy doesn't have any space to maneuver in that sense, because it's a democracy, and another party is just waiting to capitalize on poisonous publicity to keep the machine going. And it is the capitalist, colonialist, neo-colonialist machine that is run from the inside. Because, I always repeat what Stephen Bantu Biko says, the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. We keep ourselves oppressed because we know it. And sometimes it's the only thing we know. Today, I think one of the really big problems that the state faces is that after many, many years, there are fissures in the consensus among Indians, and those fissures have come because people have seen the undeniably mass democratic unarmed protest day after day, year after year in Kashmir. And people are affected. They're not easily able to say these are militants, Islamists, Taliban. There has been a fracturing of the old consensus. And in the case of the wars in Chhattisgarh or Odisha, Jharkhand and Kashmir, even Manipur to some extent, the state is well aware of the old consensus being very shaky. There are serious cracks. And that has been what has happened with the Hasbara narrative of Israel. It's broken down. People have begun to see it for what it is. A journalist in Kashmir told me that top Israeli military and intelligence officials have been visiting Kashmir. What are they doing there? I wonder. I think that the US understands that Pakistan is on shaky ground. We know it's a nuclear power. We know the whole adventure in Afghanistan is on the skids. They don't know what to do, and they don't know how to get out. They want to get out, I think, but they don't know how, even now. You have the rise of China, huge stakes in the gas fields of Central Asia, and you have Pakistan, an old ally that is also on the skids, partly because of the US history of intervention, or should I say, almost wholly because of it. Ever since it became a country, Pakistan was never allowed to administer its own affairs or develop democratic institutions. At least India was allowed to. And now it's kind of hollowing them out, but Pakistan was never allowed. The US needs to step back onto surer ground. It needs a new frontier because Pakistan's frontier is collapsing. And I think what is going on now, how do they build a retreat in Ladakh, in Kashmir, these areas as a fallback plan? Thank you. And the Israeli involvement is the same as the American involvement. There's no difference between them. The Israelis and Indians are now thick, meaning tight. The US conducts more military exercises with India than any other country in the world. When Obama came here in November, the New York Times said the country is rapidly turning into one of the world's most lucrative arms markets. And then Obama arrives here with 200 top US corporate executives, signs a deal for Boeing C-7 cargo planes worth $5 billion, and there are many more arms deals in the offing. All to sate what the New York Times calls India's appetite for more sophisticated weaponry. Why do you think America is keeping that war going? Because it likes to think that its biggest export is corn. Some people say that India's biggest export is weaponry. The US's biggest export is terror. Absolutely. The US's biggest export is terror. Because he is handsome. The US is a hell of a publicist to talk about freedom and not have all its citizens equal. I mean, when you look at people who have spoken for the US, they've all been really good spin doctors. Wasn't it, fuck, I can't remember who it was. One of the US people who, like, household fucking name that I've forgotten, had the speeches of Joseph Goebbels on their bookshelf. Because Joseph Goebbels was a brilliant man. And I think the fact that the US's greatest export is terror keeps other countries in line with what the US wants, lest that very large military be unleashed. India's appetite has certainly grown. Partly that appetite has to do with pleasing their masters. Because I want to know when the last time was that they used any of these sophisticated weapons. And who are they going to use them against? Can they use any sophisticated weapons in the war against China or Pakistan? They can't. Because all of these are now nuclear-armed countries. The great irony is that the more sophisticated the weapons the military-industrial complex develops, the less the real threats from conventional warfare become. The threats that form terrorism cannot be addressed with sophisticated weapons, tanks and torpedoes, or with any of that. Certainly all countries, I'm sure India is right on the top of the pile, have a huge appetite for weapons of surveillance and spying. Israel! But have the greatest But the greatest use that conventional weapons for conventional warfare have been put to parade up and down Rajpath in New Delhi on Republic Day as a sort of narcissistic show rather than any practical use. India is a country that spends billions on these weapons, while 800 million people live on less than 20 rupees a day. This is back in 2011. Can somebody please Google how much 20 rupees is in dollars today? $20 a day is about 50 cents US. This was in 2011. In fact, the India that is essentialized, the one that the West identifies with, is lauded and praised as the new billionaire, as new billionaires are added to the Forbes list. Utsa Patnaik, an economist in Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi, says there is a deep agricultural depression in the country. Farmer suicides because of debt are at unbelievable levels. 20 cents. People in India live on 20 cents a day today. Because that hasn't risen. People still live on 20 rupees a day. Farmer suicides because of debt are at unbelievable levels, and there has been correspondingly a sharp decline in grain output and consumption. The Republic of Hunger is actually the title of one of Utsa Patnaik's books. India has more poor people than 7 of the poorest African countries put together. And we have this litany of farmers who have killed themselves because they've gone into debt. You have increasingly ecological and environmental crises, wars breaking out, and this kind of cabaret still goes on. I spoke to some of the correspondents of major Western publications who told me they have strict instructions not to write bad stories about India. Whew, 1 rupee is 1 US cent. India is the finance destination for the rest of the world, so you have people looking to India to revitalize economy. You have an Indian government that has become so servile it doesn't any longer know what's good for it. Leaving aside the wars in Kashmir and Manipur, which are different kinds of wars, they're battles for identity and nationhood, but you have the battle within India that concerns the rest of the world, because it's not just a battle of survival of millions of people. It's a battle for ideas of the future of the world and what it's going to be. Take P. Chidambaram, the Home Minister, formerly the Finance Minister from Harvard Business School, saying that he visualizes an India in which more than 85% of its people live in cities, which is like 500 million people he expects to move. 750 minimum wages. Oof. That's these people cannot be moved unless it becomes a military state. And then a couple of years later, the same minister says that migrants in the cities are the root of crime, and they carry this behavior which is unacceptable in any modern city, so they have to be over-policed. There isn't place for poor people to plant their feet anymore. You have judges and all of these kinds of people basically sanitizing India against the poor. We are not talking about a minority. We are not talking about the few. We are talking of a majority of people in this country who have no place in their own country. They have no place in the imagination, no place in institutions, no place in the law. They have a few bones thrown at them, like the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, but that also generates a kind of capital that the middleman siphons off. So you're really heading for a kind of crisis I don't think any of the people who are in charge of this country have a handle on. And that is where I'm going to stop today. Any questions? Right, if there are no questions, I'm going to close out and go back upstairs because, yeah, fuck this cold. I am not staying downstairs while it is this cold. I am going to get into bed, put my headphones on, and go and talk to my beloved people. And remind you that poor people, people with disabilities, people who are considered quote unquote undesirable are being disappeared by their own governments again and again and again. In every single manner of the word, people are disappeared. Get to know your neighbors. Get to know your neighbors and fight for them. Fight for them in rooms where they aren't. Fight for them in the rooms where they're not allowed. If you have a passport that is powerful, fight for them. If you have a skin color that is powerful, fight for them. If your gender, if your sexuality is powerful, fight for those who are not. And I'm not just saying, what are you going to tell your kids when they ask, what were you doing during this time? You're not going to be able to answer that. But it's not just about those kinds of questions. It's the question of not what were you doing. It was what were you doing with your privilege. Unfortunately, some of the people I love deeply are doing nothing with it, except arguing with bigots on Facebook. Don't become one of those people. Now I'm going to tell you a story that some of you may have heard before. The Fees Must Fall protests that took place from 2015 all the way up to 2018 in South Africa until fee increases were stopped. There was an old Gujarati auntie in her sari who used to come to the universities with her grandsons with this huge pot. You know those huge aluminium pots? Those ones that you can only cook on fire with them. They're like freaking massive pots. In Hindi, we call them handa. Handa is like those fire pit pots. She used to come with one of those polystyrene bowls and plastic spoons and feed the students who had been shot at and roughed up by the police and campus security, the students who had just been demonized in pretty much every mainstream newspaper or news outlet. These kids are covered in bruises and bloodied and fighting for their right to an education, a free education, as the post-apartheid government promised. Free education. She wasn't on the front lines. She could barely speak a word of English. She spoke in soft Gujarati. But she fed the students. She wasn't fighting the police. She wasn't fighting anyone. She was giving people the hope, the sustenance, the ability to fight another day. So she may not have been in the Fees Must Fall protests, but she was certainly an integral part of it. So when people say, I can't do much, think about the soup. Sometimes, maybe all you can do is provide the soup. And the soup is necessary. Think about all of the people who pitched in to support the militants against the apartheid regime in South Africa. Think about all the mostly women who did the unpaid labor of keeping so many activists alive by feeding them, housing them, clothing them. Were they on the front lines? Exactly, JJ. Feed somebody who's hungry. You know, people say you can't learn on an empty stomach, you can't fight on one either. And in saying this, Kiara, you bring the soup. And so many others. So many of you. So don't just say, I'm just here. Even if you don't think of yourself as a revolutionary, you bring the soup. And it's good soup. So remember, eat something, take your meds, drink water. Don't forget about your tea until it gets cold a third time. Remember to smash the motherfucking patriarchy, eat all the white men. And if you don't eat meat, compost them, because we feed our oppressors to the land. And remember to be kind, especially to yourselves, especially you, Kiara. I'm going to invoke Rule 8 the next time, because everybody deserves kindness, including you. So go out there and make good trouble. And I'm going to say goodbye to Twitch and YouTube for now. We'll be back for more Orientalism tomorrow. Yay!